The day Mara Bellamy was offered as a public joke, the entire town of Red Hollow learned what it meant to underestimate a woman who had survived alone in the dark. Her father dragged her onto that stage like livestock. Her sisters smirked with relief. The crowd erupted in laughter because everyone knew the scarred drifter had earned the right to choose a bride, and nobody believed he would choose her. But Colt Mercer didn't flinch. He accepted. And in that single moment, the frontier town's cruelty began to unravel. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale travels. The first time Mara Bellamy saw the bear, she was alone. That wasn't unusual. Mara was always alone. The August sun had barely cleared the eastern mountains when she hauled herself out of the cramped storage room that served as her bedroom, tucked behind the main house like an afterthought, like something her father wanted hidden but couldn't quite throw away. Her back ached from sleeping on the thin mattress that had lost its shape years ago. Her hands were already blistered from yesterday's work, the skin cracked and raw around her fingernails. She pulled on her boots, scuffed leather things that used to belong to her mother, and stepped outside into the pre-dawn cold. The orchard stretched before her like a living cathedral, rows upon rows of peach trees, their branches heavy with fruit that wouldn't be ready for another 3 weeks. Her mother had planted the first saplings 20 years ago, back when the Bellamy name still meant something in Red Hollow, back when people smiled when they said it. Mara walked the perimeter fence, checking for breaks the way she did every morning. The wood was rotting in places. She'd asked her father to replace the damaged sections last month, but he'd waved her off with barely a glance. "Do it yourself if it matters so much," he'd muttered, already halfway through his second whiskey of the day. So she had. Poorly, with whatever scraps she could find, but she had tried. That's when she saw it. The eastern fence was destroyed. Not damaged. Destroyed. 3 full sections had been ripped apart. The posts snapped clean through like kindling. Deep gouges scarred the earth, claw marks, each one as wide as her hand. A trail of destruction led into the orchard itself, where 2 trees had been stripped of bark, their trunks shredded and bleeding sap. Mara's breath caught in her throat. She knew these marks. Black bear. A big one, judging by the height of the scratches. And it had been here recently. The sap was still fresh, still sticky. Her hands trembled as she followed the trail deeper into the orchard. More damaged trees, scattered fruit, half-eaten and left to rot. The bear had come through like a storm, taking what it wanted and destroying the rest. By the time she made it back to the house, the sun had fully risen, and her father was sitting on the porch with his coffee and his ledger. The only 2 things he seemed to care about anymore. "We have a problem," Mara said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "There's a bear." Martin Bellamy didn't look up from his calculations. "Then fix the fence." "It's not about the fence. The bear destroyed 2 trees and ate through at least 50 pounds of fruit. If it comes back, you'll deal with it." He turned a page, his pen scratching across the numbers. "That's what you're here for, isn't it? To handle things?" Mara's jaw tightened. "I can't fight a black bear alone." "Then don't fight it. Scare it off. Set up noisemakers. I don't care." He finally looked at her, his eyes cold and dismissive. "I'm not paying someone to do what you should be capable of handling yourself." "But enough." His voice cracked like a whip. "I have real problems to worry about. The harvest is in 3 weeks, and if we don't bring in a full yield, we're ruined. So unless that bear is currently eating the house, I suggest you figure it out." Mara stood there for a long moment, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Then she turned and walked away, because arguing with Martin Bellamy was like arguing with a stone wall, pointless and exhausting. Behind her, she heard the porch door open and the soft laughter of her sisters drifting out into the morning air. "Was that Mara?" Celeste's voice, sweet and mocking. "Did she actually try to bother Father with her problems again?" "She's so dramatic," Lydia added, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "A bear. As if she'd even know what a real bear looks like." More laughter. The door closed. Mara kept walking. The town of Red Hollow sat in a valley between 2 mountain ranges, carved out of the wilderness by people who were too stubborn to admit when they were beaten. It was a hard place, built by hard people, and it had no patience for weakness. Mara had learned that lesson early. She'd been 9 years old when her mother died. Fever, the doctor had said, though he'd been 3 days late arriving and half drunk when he finally showed up. By then, her mother was already gone, and Mara had been left alone with a father who looked at her like she was a problem he hadn't asked for. "You're big-boned," he told her once, when she was 12 and still hoping he might say something kind. "Like your mother's side of the family. Strong for work. That's useful, at least." He'd meant it as a compliment. It hadn't felt like one. Her sisters, on the other hand, had taken after their father's side, delicate features, slender frames, the kind of beauty that made men stupid. Celeste was 22 now, with golden hair and a smile that could convince a man to do just about anything. Lydia was 20, dark-haired and sharp-eyed, with a tongue that could cut deeper than any knife. And then there was Mara, 24 years old, broad-shouldered and strong, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubbornness. The daughter nobody wanted to talk about, the one they kept in the back, out of sight, handling the work nobody else wanted to do. She told herself it didn't matter. Most days, she even believed it. Ma sumped. The bear came back that night. Mara heard it just after midnight, a deep, guttural sound that rumbled through the darkness like distant thunder. She grabbed the old rifle from beside her bed, the one her mother had taught her to shoot with, and ran outside in her nightdress and boots. The moon was nearly full, bright enough to see by. Bright enough to see the massive shadow moving through the orchard, ripping branches aside like they were nothing. The bear was enormous, easily 7 feet tall when it reared up on its hind legs, its fur black as pitch, its eyes reflecting the moonlight in eerie pinpricks of gold. Mara raised the rifle, her hand shaking so badly she could barely hold it steady. "Get out of here!" she screamed. "Go!" The bear turned its massive head toward her. For a moment, they stared at each other across the rows of trees. The girl with the rifle she barely knew how to use, and the beast that could tear her apart without breaking stride. Then Mara fired. The shot went wide, cracking into a tree trunk 10 feet to the left of the bear. The sound echoed across the valley like a thunderclap. The bear dropped to all fours and charged. Mara ran. She didn't think, didn't plan. Just turned and sprinted back toward the house, her boots pounding against the dirt, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind her, she could hear the bear crashing through the orchard, destroying everything in its path. She made it to the porch and slammed the door behind her, throwing the bolt just as something massive collided with the other side. The entire house shook. Wood splintered. The bear roared, a sound so loud and primal that Mara felt it in her bones. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the sound faded. The bear was gone. Mara slid down to the floor, her back against the door, the rifle still clutched in her trembling hands. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might break through. The next morning, her father surveyed the damage with the same expression he wore when reviewing disappointing ledgers. "You missed," he said flatly. "I scared it off," Mara replied, her voice hoarse from screaming. "You wasted a bullet." He turned away from the destroyed trees, the scattered fruit, the gouged earth. "And now it knows there's easy food here. It'll come back." "Then let me go to town. Let me ask for help. Someone must know how to—" "Absolutely not." Martin's face hardened. "Do you have any idea what people would say if they found out we couldn't even protect our own land? That we needed help from the town?" "Who cares what they say? We need—" "I care what they say." His voice rose, sharp and cutting. "This family's reputation is all we have left. I won't have you running into town begging for charity because you're too incompetent to handle a simple animal problem." Mara's hands clenched. "It's not a simple animal, it's a—" "I don't want to hear it." He waved her off dismissively. "Figure it out, Mara. Or don't. Either way, stay out of my sight." He walked away, leaving her standing alone among the ruins of her mother's orchard. For the next week, Mara barely slept. She spent every night patrolling the orchard, the rifle across her lap, watching the shadows for any sign of movement. She set up makeshift noisemakers, pots and pans strung on wire, anything that might make enough sound to scare the bear away. It didn't work. The bear came back 3 more times. Each time, it destroyed more trees, ate more fruit, left more devastation in its wake. And each time, Mara could only watch from a distance, too afraid to get close, too inexperienced to know what else to do. By the 8th night, she was exhausted. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep. Her hands shook constantly. She'd started seeing shadows that weren't there, jumping at sounds that didn't exist. That's when she made the decision. If her father wouldn't let her ask for help, she'd find another way. She'd track the bear herself, learn its patterns, figure out where it came from and where it went. Maybe, if she was lucky, she'd find a way to drive it off for good. So she started mapping its movements. Every morning, she followed its trail through the orchard and into the wilderness beyond. She marked the trees it damaged, the paths it took, the times it appeared. She learned to read the signs. Fresh claw marks meant it had been there within the last few hours. Scattered droppings told her what it was eating and how recently. Slowly, over days and then weeks, a pattern emerged. The bear came from the north, from the deep mountains where the forest grew thick and dark. It followed a specific route down to the orchard, always approaching from the same direction, always leaving the same way. It was methodical, almost routine, as if it had decided the Bellamy orchard was now part of its territory. Mara filled a notebook with her observations, drawings, notes, timestamps. Her mother had taught her to keep detailed records of the orchard's health, and now she applied that same discipline to tracking the beast that was destroying it. But knowing the bear's patterns and stopping it were two entirely different things. She still had no idea what to do. The turning point came on a sweltering afternoon in early September. Mara was in town, sent by her father to purchase supplies for the upcoming harvest. She moved through the streets quickly, her head down, trying to avoid attention. The people of Red Hollow had a way of looking through her, as if she were invisible, or worse, as if she were something embarrassing that they'd rather not acknowledge. She was loading sacks of grain into the wagon when she heard the commotion. A crowd had gathered in the town square, voices rising in excitement. Mara hesitated, then left the wagon and moved closer, curiosity overcoming her usual instinct to stay invisible. Her father stood at the center of the crowd, his face flushed with drink and desperation. Beside him, Celeste and Lydia posed like decorations, their prettiest dresses on display, their smiles calculated and perfect. "Gentlemen," Martin Bellamy's voice boomed across the square, "I have a proposition for you." The crowd pressed closer. Mara recognized most of them, ranch hands, drifters, young men from the surrounding homesteads, all of them staring at her sisters with undisguised interest. "As you all know," Martin continued, "my orchard has been plagued by a black bear, a massive beast that's been destroying my property and threatening my livelihood. I've tried everything to stop it, but the animal is too cunning, too dangerous for ordinary methods." Mara's stomach dropped. "No, he wouldn't. So I'm making an offer." Martin spread his arms wide, his showman's grin firmly in place. "Whichever man among you brings me that bear's head, whichever brave soul rids my land of this menace, that man may choose one of my daughters as his bride." The crowd erupted. Men whooped and hollered. Someone fired a gun into the air. Celeste and Lydia smiled and waved, playing their parts perfectly, as if this were all some grand romantic gesture instead of their father auctioning them off like livestock. Mara stood frozen at the edge of the crowd, invisible as always. Her father's eyes swept over the gathered men, his grin widening, and then, for just a moment, his gaze landed on her. He saw her. She knew he saw her, and the slight curl of his lip, the faint disgust in his expression, told her everything she needed to know. The offer was for Celeste and Lydia. It had always been for them, the beautiful daughters, the ones worth showing off. Not her, never her. "Any takers?" Martin called out, and a dozen hands shot into the air. Mara turned and walked back to the wagon, her throat tight, her eyes burning. She didn't wait to hear the details. Didn't stay to watch the men line up, eager to prove themselves for a chance at her sisters. She just wanted to disappear. Back. That night, Mara sat in her storage room with her notebook open, staring at her careful maps and observations. 3 weeks of work. 3 weeks of sleepless nights and careful tracking, all rendered meaningless because her father had decided to turn the bear hunt into a spectacle. A knock on her door made her jump. "What?" she called out, hastily closing the notebook. The door opened and Celeste stepped inside, her perfect face arranged in an expression of false concern. "Mara," she said softly, "are you all right? I saw you leave the square earlier." "I'm fine." "Are you sure? Because you looked upset." Celeste sat down on the edge of the bed, smoothing her skirts with practiced elegance. "I wanted to make sure you understood. Father's offer isn't meant to hurt you. It's just, well, It's about what makes sense. For the family. Mara's jaw tightened. I said I'm fine. It's just that you're so useful here, you know? Celeste continued, her tone dripping with syrupy sweetness. You understand the orchard in a way Lydia and I never could. And honestly, what man would want a wife who's always covered in dirt and sweat? You're better suited to this life. It's where you belong. Get out. Celeste's smile didn't waver. I'm only trying to help you see things clearly. Father didn't mention you in his offer because he knows you wouldn't want that kind of attention anyway. You prefer being alone, don't you? Working with your hands, away from people? I said get out. There's no need to be rude, Mara. I'm your sister. I care about you. Celeste stood, brushing invisible dust from her dress. I just want you to understand that when one of those men wins, and when Father chooses who gets to marry him, it's not personal. It's just practical. She left, closing the door softly behind her. Mara sat in the silence, her hands trembling with a rage she had no outlet for. She wanted to scream, wanted to throw something, wanted to run into the orchard and disappear into the darkness where no one could find her. Instead, she opened her notebook again and kept working. Because the bear didn't care about her father's bargain. It didn't care about beauty or marriage or family politics. It was still out there, still destroying the orchard her mother had built. And Mara was the only one who actually seemed to give a damn about stopping it. The first hunters arrived the next day. Mara watched from the orchard as they set up camp on the eastern edge of the property. Half a dozen men, all armed with rifles and swagger, treating the hunt like it was some kind of adventure. They were loud, careless, tracking through the orchard like they owned it. By sunset, 3 of them had given up and left. The bear was smarter than they expected, more elusive. It didn't show itself during the day, and tracking it at night proved too dangerous for men who'd never actually hunted anything more threatening than deer. The second group lasted 2 days before they admitted defeat. The third group didn't even make it past the first night. The bear destroyed their camp, scattered their supplies, and sent them running back to town with stories of a monster bear, huge as a horse, with eyes that glowed in the dark. Her father grew more desperate with each failed attempt. Useless, he muttered, pacing the porch like a caged animal. All of them, useless. Celeste and Lydia watched from the windows, their earlier excitement fading into irritation. The longer the hunt went on, the less romantic it became. The men were dirty, unsuccessful, and increasingly embarrassed. Not exactly the kind of suitors they'd been hoping for. Mara kept to herself, working the orchard during the day and tracking the bear at night. Her notebook grew thicker with observations. She learned the bear's favorite paths, the trees it preferred, the times it was most active. She learned everything except how to kill it. Then, on a cold morning in late September, a stranger rode into town. Itet. Mara first heard about him from the general store owner, Mrs. Mackey, who loved gossip almost as much as she loved profit. Drifter, Mrs. Mackey said, her voice low and conspiratorial as she packaged Mara's order. Rode in this morning on a half-dead horse, got scars all over his face like he's been in more fights than he can count. Didn't say much, just asked about the bear bounty and where to find the Bellamy place. Mara's hand stilled on the counter. Another hunter? If you can call him that. Looks more like trouble to me. Mrs. Mackey leaned in closer. But he's got that look, you know. The kind of man who's seen things, done things. Your father might actually have a real contender this time. Mara took her packages and left without responding. Another hunter meant another man tramping through her mother's orchard, destroying what the bear hadn't already ruined. Another man who'd spend a few days pretending to be brave before giving up and leaving. Another man who saw her sisters as prizes to be won and her as nothing. She was halfway home when she saw him. He was standing at the edge of the Bellamy property, studying the fence line with an intensity that made Mara slow her horse. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in worn leather and faded denim. Mrs. Mackey hadn't been lying about the scars. 3 jagged lines ran down the left side of his face, from temple to jaw, old enough to be white against his tanned skin. As Mara approached, he turned to look at her. His eyes were gray, sharp, the kind of eyes that miss nothing. "This the Bellamy place?" he asked. His voice was rough, like gravel scraped across stone. "It is. You work here?" Mara's jaw tightened. "Something like that." He He studied her for a moment longer, then turned back to the fence. Bear came through here recently. Big one, from the looks of it. Despite herself, Mara found herself dismounting, moving closer to see what he was seeing. How can you tell? He pointed to the claw marks on the fence post. Depth of the gouges, height of the scratches. See how the wood splintered outward? That means the bear was moving fast, aggressive. Not just passing through, it was hunting for something specific. The fruit, Mara said quietly. It's been coming for the peaches. Smart bear. He glanced at her. Most black bears would hit easier targets. Farms with livestock, garbage from the town. This one knows what it wants and where to find it. He paused. You've been tracking it. The question caught her off guard. Yes. How did you boot prints? He nodded toward the ground near the fence. Small, fresh, following the bear's trail into the tree line. That you? Mara felt heat rise in her cheeks. I've been trying to understand its patterns, where it comes from, where it goes. Show me. It wasn't a request. Mara hesitated, then pulled out her notebook from her saddlebag. She opened it to the most recent pages, her maps, her notes, her careful documentation of 3 weeks of tracking. The stranger took the notebook and studied it in silence. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Respect, maybe, or surprise. This is good work, he said finally. Most people wouldn't know where to start. My mother taught me to keep records. For the orchard. Your mother was smart. He handed the notebook back. You know the bear better than anyone else who's tried to hunt it. I don't know how to kill it, though. But you know where it'll be, when it'll come, how it moves. He looked at her directly. That's half the battle right there. For the first time in weeks, maybe longer, Mara felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. Who are you? She asked. Colt Mercer. He offered his hand. Mara shook it, feeling the calluses, the strength. Mara Bellamy. His eyebrows rose slightly. Bellamy? You're one of the daughters. And there it was. The moment when his interest would shift, when he'd start asking about Celeste and Lydia, when she'd become invisible again. But instead, Colt just nodded. Then you've got more stake in this than anyone. That bear's destroying your family's livelihood. My father's livelihood, Mara corrected automatically. Then more quietly, but yes. Colt studied her for a long moment. Then he said, I could use a tracker. Someone who knows the land and the animal. If you're willing, I'll take you on as a partner. Mara stared at him. A partner? Equal share of the work. Equal say in how we handle it. He paused. Though I should warn you, it's going to be dangerous. That bear's not going to go down easy. I've been facing it alone for weeks, Mara said, her voice steady despite the rapid hammering of her heart. I'm not afraid of danger. Colt's scarred face cracked into something that might have been a smile. No, I don't imagine you are. And for the first time since her mother died, Mara felt like someone actually saw her, not as the unwanted daughter, not as free labor, not as something to be hidden away, just as herself. Yeah. Her father, predictably, hated the idea. Absolutely not, Martin Bellamy said when Colt explained the plan. They stood in the main house, Celeste and Lydia watching from the doorway with barely concealed interest. My daughter is not going to be gallivanting through the wilderness with some drifter. She knows the bear better than anyone, Colt replied calmly. She's been tracking it for weeks. I've seen her work. It's solid. That's not the point. The point is, you want that bear dead, Colt interrupted. And I can do it. But I'll do it faster and safer with someone who actually knows what they're dealing with. Martin's face flushed red. I don't care about faster. I care about my daughter's reputation. What will people say if they find out she's... No one knows about her, Colt said flatly. I asked in town. Mentioned I'd met one of the Bellamy daughters. Everyone assumed I meant those two. He nodded toward Celeste and Lydia. Nobody even mentioned a third daughter. The silence that followed was devastating. Mara stood in the corner of the room, her face burning with humiliation. Of course no one in town knew about her. Of course her father had made sure of that. Celeste broke the silence with a nervous laugh. Well, that's because Mara doesn't really... She prefers to stay home. She's not much for socializing. Right, Lydia added quickly. She's shy. Aren't you, Mara? Mara said nothing. Colt looked at her father. So there's no reputation to damage. She helps me kill the bear, and then I collect my reward. Simple. Martin's jaw worked silently for a moment. Then he said, Fine. But if anything happens to her, if there's any trouble at all, nothing will happen, Colt said. You have my word. He turned to Mara. We start tomorrow, pre-dawn. Bring your notebook and dress warm. Then he left, leaving Mara standing in the middle of her father's house, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. That night she lay in her storage room, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Tomorrow she'd go into the wilderness with a stranger, hunting an animal that could kill them both. And somehow, impossibly, she was looking forward to it. Because for the first time in her life, someone thought she was useful for something other than being invisible. They left before sunrise, when the world was still gray and cold. Colt waited for her at the northern edge of the orchard, 2 horses saddled and ready. He'd brought supplies, rope, knives, ammunition, water, everything they might need for a long day in the wilderness. Mara brought her notebook and her mother's rifle. You know how to use that? Colt asked, nodding at the weapon. Barely, Mara admitted. I fired it twice. Missed both times. We'll work on that. He swung up into his saddle. First rule of hunting dangerous animals: know your weapon better than you know yourself. They rode north, following the bear's trail into the mountains. The terrain grew rougher as they climbed, the trees thicker, the air colder. Mara led the way, using her notes to navigate, and Colt followed, watching everything with those sharp gray eyes. How long have you been tracking this bear? He asked as they paused to water the horses. 3 weeks, since my father refused to help. And he still doesn't believe you can handle it. It wasn't a question. He doesn't believe I can handle anything, Mara said quietly. Except the work he doesn't want to do himself. Colt was silent for a moment, then he said, My father was the same way. Thought I was worthless unless I was doing exactly what he wanted. What happened? I left. He looked at her. And I never went back. Mara wanted to ask more, but something in his expression told her the subject was closed. Instead, she pointed to a cluster of trees ahead. The bear comes through here regularly. See those claw marks? Fresh, probably from last night. They spent the rest of the day following the trail deeper into the mountains. Colt taught her how to read the signs she'd been documenting, not just what they meant, but how to use them, how to predict where the bear would go next, how to set up an ambush, how to stay downwind so it wouldn't catch their scent. He was patient, methodical, explaining everything in a way that made sense. And he never once made her feel stupid for asking questions. By the time the sun started to set, Mara realized she'd learned more in one day with Colt than she had in 3 weeks alone. We should head back, Colt said, scanning the darkening forest. Don't want to be out here after nightfall. But as they turned to leave, Mara heard it, a low rumbling sound, deep and primal. The bear. Colt's hand shot out, grabbing her arm. Don't move. They stood frozen as the massive shape emerged from the trees ahead. Even bigger than Mara remembered. Its black fur seemed to absorb the fading light, making it look like a living shadow. It hadn't seen them yet. It was focused on something else, digging through a fallen log, searching for insects. Back away, Colt whispered. Slowly. Don't run. They retreated step by careful step, never taking their eyes off the bear. Mara's heart hammered so hard she was sure the animal would hear it. Her hands trembled. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps. The bear looked up. For one terrible moment, it stared directly at them. Then, with a snort, it turned and lumbered away into the forest, disappearing like smoke. Mara's legs nearly gave out. That, Colt said quietly, is what we're dealing with. They rode back to the orchard in silence, both shaken by how close they'd come. But as they dismounted near the barn, Colt turned to Mara and said, You did good today. Kept your head. Didn't panic. Mara felt something warm bloom in her chest. Thank you. We'll try again tomorrow, and the day after that if we need to. He paused. We'll get him, Mara. I promise you that. She believed him, and that night, for the first time in weeks, she slept without nightmares. The days began to blur together. Every morning, Mara and Colt rode into the mountains. They tracked the bear, learned its territory, mapped out the places it felt safe. They set up watch posts in the trees, practiced shooting until Mara's aim improved, discussed strategy late into the evening, and slowly, something shifted between them. It started with small things. The way Colt handed her coffee in the morning without being asked. The way he listened when she talked about the orchard, about her mother's plans, about the dreams that had died with her. The way he never once looked at her like she was less than whole. One evening, after a particularly long day, they sat by a small fire in the forest, warming their hands against the autumn chill. "Why did you take this job?" Mara asked. "The reward is, my sisters are beautiful, but you don't seem like the kind of man who needs a wife handed to him." Colt poked at the fire with a stick. "I don't do it for the bride." "Then why?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I spent 10 years working cattle drives across the frontier, saw a lot of places, met a lot of people, and everywhere I went, I saw the same thing, people who'd built something good, something worth protecting, and then had it taken away by things they couldn't control, drought, disease, bandits, bears." He looked at her. "Your mother built something beautiful here. I can see it in the orchard, in the way the trees are laid out, in the way everything's designed to support everything else. That kind of vision deserves to be protected." Mara's throat tightened. "Most people just see fruit and profit." "Most people are idiots." She laughed, actually laughed, and the sound surprised them both. "Besides," Colt added, his mouth quirking into a half smile, "I've met your sisters. They're pretty enough, I suppose, but they don't know the difference between a peach tree and a pine. And that matters? It matters if you're building a life on a frontier orchard." They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the fire burn down to embers. And Mara realized with a mixture of wonder and terror that she was starting to trust him, not just as a hunting partner, as something more. 3 days later, they found the bear's den. It was hidden deep in a rocky outcropping halfway up the mountain, surrounded by thick brush. They approached carefully, downwind, watching for any sign of movement. "This is it," Colt whispered. "This is where he sleeps during the day." Mara's pulse raced. "So we could trap him here?" "Maybe, but it's dangerous. If we spook him in his den, he'll come out fighting, and we'll be trapped on this narrow ledge with nowhere to run. So what do we do?" Colt thought for a moment. "We wait, we watch, we figure out his schedule, and then we pick our moment carefully." So they waited. For 2 more days, they observed the den from a distance. They learned when the bear left, always at dusk, always heading down toward the valley. They learned when he returned just before dawn, heavy and sluggish from a night of feeding. And they learned that the bear was smart. He varied his routes. He backtracked to confuse his scent trail. He was cautious in a way that most animals weren't. "He's been hunted before," Colt said on the 3rd day. "That's why he's so careful. Someone tried to kill him and failed." "How do you know?" Colt pointed to the bear's shoulder. Even from a distance, Mara could see the scar, a long, pale line where the fur had never grown back properly. "Bullet wound," Colt said. "Old, but it healed wrong. Probably still gives him pain, which makes him meaner." Mara felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. "He's just trying to survive." "So are we." Colt looked at her. "You understand that, right? When the time comes, it's going to be us or him." Mara nodded, but the sympathy didn't fade. The bear was a killer, yes. But he was also just an animal, doing what animals do. It wasn't his fault that his survival meant the destruction of everything her mother had built. It wasn't fair to either of them. A shaik. The night it all went wrong started like any other. They'd set up camp near the den, planning to ambush the bear at dawn when he returned from his nightly feeding. Mara had the rifle. Colt had his own weapon, a heavy hunting rifle that looked like it could drop a buffalo. The plan was simple. Wait until the bear was close, both fire at once, and hope. At least one shot was fatal. But the bear didn't come back at dawn. They waited as the sun rose, as the morning light filtered through the trees, as the forest woke up around them. No bear. "Something's wrong," Colt said, his voice tense. "He should have been back by now." That's when Mara heard it. A scream. Distant, but unmistakable. Human. "That came from the orchard," Mara breathed, her blood turning to ice. They ran. Down the mountain, through the trees, racing against the rising sun. Mara's lungs burned. Her legs ached. But she didn't stop because that scream had been terrified, and it had come from her home. They burst out of the tree line to find chaos. The bear had come to the orchard, but it hadn't come alone. There were cubs. 2 of them, small and clumsy, tearing through the peach trees under their mother's watchful eye. Not a male bear. A mother. And mothers were 1,000 times more dangerous. The screaming came from Lydia, who'd apparently decided to pick fruit early and had stumbled into the bears. She was trapped in a tree, sobbing hysterically, while the mother bear circled below, roaring with protective fury. "Get inside!" Mara shouted at her sister. "Climb higher!" But Lydia was too panicked to listen. She just kept screaming. The bear reared up, massive paws reaching for the lowest branches. Colt raised his rifle. "Wait!" Mara grabbed his arm. "The cubs. If you shoot the mother, they'll starve. If I don't shoot, your sister dies." Mara's mind raced. There had to be another way. There had to be. She fired her rifle into the air. The shot cracked like thunder. The mother bear dropped to all fours, startled, and turned toward the sound. Toward Mara. "Run!" Colt screamed. Mara ran. The bear charged after her, away from Lydia, away from the cubs. Mara sprinted through the orchard, her heart in her throat, the sound of the bear's pursuit like an earthquake behind her. She didn't have a plan, didn't have time to think, just ran on pure instinct, leading the bear away from everyone else. A massive paw swiped at her back. She felt the wind of it, felt how close it came to tearing her apart. Then Colt was there, shouting, firing into the air, drawing the bear's attention away from Mara. The bear turned on him instead. They played a deadly game of keep-away, taking turns drawing the bear's focus, never letting it settle on one target long enough to kill. It was chaos. It was terrifying. It was the most alive Mara had ever felt. Finally, blessedly, the mother bear seemed to realize her cubs were alone. With one last roar of frustration, she turned and lumbered back toward them, gathering the young ones and disappearing into the forest. Mara collapsed to her knees, gasping for air. Colt stood over her, breathing hard, his rifle still raised. "You," he said between breaths, "are absolutely insane. I saved my sister. You almost got yourself killed." "But I didn't." Mara looked up at him, and despite everything, despite the terror and the exhaustion and the near-death experience, she smiled. "We didn't." Colt stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly he started to laugh. It was a rough sound, rusty with disuse, but genuine, and Mara found herself laughing too. The 2 of them sitting in the destroyed orchard, laughing like lunatics while the morning sun rose over the mountains. Behind them, Lydia climbed down from her tree, shaking and furious. But Mara didn't care, because she'd just faced down a mother bear and lived. And for the first time in her life, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she was capable of anything. Lydia didn't speak to Mara for 3 days after the incident with the mother bear. Not that Mara expected gratitude. That would have required her sister to acknowledge that Mara had saved her life, and the Bellamy family had never been good at acknowledging uncomfortable truths. Instead, Lydia complained loudly to anyone who would listen about how the noise had given her a headache, how her dress had been ruined by tree bark, how absolutely traumatizing the entire experience had been. She made no mention of who had drawn the bear away. No mention of the fact that she'd been the one foolish enough to go into the orchard alone at dawn when everyone knew the bears were most active. Celeste, predictably, took her sister's side. "You should have been more careful," she told Mara over breakfast, her voice syrupy with false concern. "What if Lydia had been seriously hurt? What would Father have said?" Mara stabbed her fork into her eggs with more force than necessary. "I was tracking the bear with Colt. We didn't know she'd be out there." "Well, maybe if you'd actually killed the thing instead of playing around in the woods, Lydia wouldn't have been in danger at all." Celeste sipped her tea delicately. "How much longer is this hunt going to take? People in town are starting to talk." "Let them talk. Easy for you to say. You don't have a reputation to protect." Celeste's smile sharpened. "Though I suppose that's convenient, isn't it? You can run around with that drifter and nobody cares because nobody expects anything from you anyway." The words hit their mark, as they always did. Mara pushed away from the table without finishing her meal and walked out, ignoring Celeste's theatrical sigh behind her. Colt was waiting by the barn, checking his rifle. He looked up as Mara approached, his scarred face unreadable. "Your sister all right?" he asked. "She's fine. Angry, but fine." And you? The question caught Mara off guard. Nobody ever asked how she was. I'm fine too. Colt studied her for a moment, those sharp gray eyes seeing too much. Then he nodded and handed her a canteen. We need to talk about what happened yesterday. They walked to the edge of the orchard, far enough from the house that they wouldn't be overheard. The morning was cool, the sky threatening rain. Mara could smell autumn in the air, that particular scent of dying leaves and approaching cold that meant harvest season was almost upon them. The bear we've been tracking, Colt said. It's not the one that's been destroying your orchard. Mara stopped walking. What? The one we saw yesterday was a female with cubs. The tracks we've been following are from a male. Bigger, heavier, different gait entirely. He pulled out a piece of paper covered in sketches. I went back this morning to check. The prints don't match. So there are 2 bears? At least 2. Maybe more. Colt's jaw tightened. The male is the real problem. He's the one doing the bulk of the damage. But now we know the female's territory overlaps with his, which means we need to be a lot more careful about where and when we hunt. Mara felt her stomach sink. 2 bears meant twice the danger, twice the complexity. And they were running out of time. The harvest was less than 2 weeks away, and every night that passed meant more damage to the orchard. We need to change our approach, Colt continued. Stop waiting for the perfect moment and start being more aggressive. Set a proper trap. Use bait. Force the male to come to us on our terms. What kind of trap? The old barn on the western edge of your property, the one that's half collapsed. Colt pointed toward the distant structure. We fortify it. Set up elevated positions for shooting. Use the peaches as bait. When the bear comes, we have clear shots from multiple angles. It was a good plan, a solid plan, but something about it made Mara uneasy. What if the female comes instead, she asked. Then we don't shoot. We wait for the male. Colt looked at her. I know you don't want to kill any animal unnecessarily. Neither do I. But your father's bargain stands. Someone's going to kill a bear eventually, and I'd rather it be us doing it right than some drunk cowboy stumbling around in the dark. He was right. Mara knew he was right, but that didn't make the knot in her stomach loosen. When do we start? She asked. Tonight. We'll prep the barn during the day, then set the bait at dusk. He paused. This is going to be dangerous, Mara. More dangerous than anything we've done so far. If something goes wrong, I know. She met his eyes. I'm still in. Something shifted in Colt's expression. Respect, maybe, or something deeper. All right then, let's get to work. They spent the rest of the morning fortifying the old barn. Colt cleared sight lines, reinforced the loft where they'd take their positions, set up escape routes in case things went badly. Mara gathered the bait, overripe peaches from the damaged trees, their sweet scent strong enough to attract any bear within a mile. By afternoon, everything was ready. That's when her father showed up. Martin Bellamy arrived at the barn in his wagon, Celeste beside him, both of them dressed as if they were heading to town for a social call rather than visiting a bear trap. I want to see what you've been doing with my property, Martin announced, climbing down from the wagon with the careful movements of a man who'd had too much to drink too early in the day. Colt stepped forward, placing himself between Martin and the barn. With respect, sir, this isn't a good time. We're setting a trap tonight and we need to keep the area clear. I don't recall asking for your opinion. Martin's face flushed red. This is my land, and I'll inspect it whenever I damn well please. Father just wants to make sure you're actually working, Celeste added sweetly. Some people in town are saying you've been using the hunt as an excuse to avoid real labor. Mara felt her hands clench into fists. We've been tracking the bear every single day for 3 weeks. And yet it's still alive. Celeste smiled. One might wonder if you're actually trying to kill it, or if you're just enjoying playing Frontier Scout with Mr. Mercer here. The implication in her tone was clear, and it made Mara's face burn with humiliation. Colt's voice, when he spoke, was dangerously calm. Miss Bellamy, if you're suggesting— I'm not suggesting anything, Celeste interrupted, her eyes wide and innocent. I'm simply observing that this hunt has taken an unusually long time, and my sister seems quite invested in prolonging it. Enough. Martin waved his hand dismissively. I don't care about town gossip. I care about results. You have 1 week, Mercer. 1 week to deliver that bear's head, or I'm opening the bounty to everyone again. 1 week isn't enough time to— 1 week, Martin repeated. And Mara stays at the house. I won't have people talking about my daughter running wild in the wilderness with some scarred drifter. The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Mara found her voice. No. Her father turned to her slowly. What did you say? I said no. Mara's heart hammered, but she held her ground. You need this bear dead, and Colt needs my help to do it. I know this land. I know the bear's patterns. Without me, he's hunting blind. Without you, he's hunting like a man instead of being distracted by... By what? Mara stepped forward. By a woman who actually knows what she's doing? By someone who spent every night for a month protecting your orchard while you drank yourself stupid? The slap came so fast Mara didn't see it coming. Her head snapped to the side, her cheek exploding in pain. She tasted blood where her teeth had cut her lip. The barn went silent. Colt moved. One moment he was standing 10 feet away, the next he had Martin's wrist in his grip, his voice low and lethal. Touch her again, and I walk. And you can explain to the whole town why you lost your best chance at killing that bear. Martin tried to pull free, but Colt's grip didn't budge. You have no right. I have every right. Colt released him with enough force to make Martin stumble backward. I took your bargain in good faith, but that bargain doesn't include watching you abuse your own daughter. How dare you? 1 week, Colt said. We'll have your bear in 1 week, but Mara works with me, or I leave tonight, and you can hunt it yourself. For a long moment, father and Drifter stared at each other. Then Martin spat into the dirt and turned away. Fine. But if there's any hint of impropriety, any whisper of scandal, there won't be. Colt's voice was ice. Martin climbed back into the wagon, jerking the reins hard enough to make the horses toss their heads. Celeste followed, but not before giving Mara a long, meaningful look. The kind of look that said this wasn't over, that there would be consequences. Then they were gone, leaving Mara and Colt alone in the clearing. Mara touched her cheek gently, feeling it swell beneath her fingers. She wanted to cry, wanted to scream, wanted to run into the forest and never come back. Instead, she said, I'm sorry you had to see that. You have nothing to apologize for. Colt's voice was rough with barely controlled anger. That man is my father. Mara cut him off, and there's nothing either of us can do about it. You could leave. The words hung between them like a dare. And go where? Mara asked. I have no money, no skills except farming, and no one who'd take me in. This orchard is all I have. It's not all you have. Colt moved closer, and Mara could see the fury still simmering in his eyes. You have courage, intelligence, strength. Those are worth more than any piece of land. Not in Red Hollow, they're not. Colt was quiet for a moment. Then he said, After we kill this bear, after I claim my reward, you could come with me. We could leave together, start somewhere new. Mara's breath caught. You don't mean that. I do. You're going to marry Celeste or Lydia. That was the bargain. The bargain was one of his daughters. It didn't specify which one. Colt's gray eyes held hers. And between you and me, I'd rather have a partner who can track a bear than one who faints at the sight of dirt. For a moment, Mara let herself imagine it. A life beyond Red Hollow. A life where she wasn't the unwanted daughter, where she could wake up without dreading the day ahead. A life with someone who saw her as an equal. Then reality crashed back in. My sisters are beautiful, she said quietly. I'm not. If you choose me, people will think you're either desperate or crazy. Let them think what they want. Easy for you to say. You'll leave eventually. But this is my home, Colt. These are the only people I've ever known. If they believe that I manipulated you somehow or that you pitied me. She shook her head. I can't live with that kind of shame. Colt reached out and gently tilted her chin up, forcing her to look at him. There is nothing shameful about you, Mara Bellamy, and anyone who thinks otherwise is a fool. His touch was warm against her bruised skin. His eyes were fierce and honest. And for just a moment, Mara let herself believe him. Then she stepped back, breaking the contact. We should finish preparing the trap. We're losing daylight. Colt watched her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, but this conversation isn't over. They worked in silence after that, both lost in their own thoughts. But something had shifted between them. Some invisible line had been crossed, and Mara knew, with a certainty that terrified her, that nothing would be the same after tonight. The trap was set by dusk. Overripe peaches scattered across the barn floor, their sweet scent thick in the air. Mara and Colt climbed into the loft, rifles loaded, and settled in to wait. The night fell around them like a curtain. Stars emerged, cold and distant. The forest came alive with nocturnal sounds, owls hunting, small animals scurrying through the underbrush, the wind whispering through the trees. Hours passed. Mara's legs cramped from staying still. Her eyes burned from staring into the darkness. Beside her, Colt remained motionless, patient as stone. Then, just after midnight, they heard it. Heavy footsteps. The crack of breaking branches. A deep, rumbling breath. The male bear emerged from the tree line. He was massive, even bigger than Mara had imagined. His black fur seemed to swallow the moonlight, making him look like a moving shadow. Old scars crisscrossed his shoulders and flanks, evidence of a long, violent life. One ear was torn, likely from a fight with another bear. He approached the barn cautiously, nose twitching as he scented the air, testing for danger. Mara's hands tightened on her rifle. Beside her, Colt's breathing slowed, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. The bear reached the scattered peaches and began to eat, massive jaws working through the fruit with casual ease. "On three," Colt whispered, barely audible. "One." The bear's head lifted. Had he heard them? "Two." Mara's heart hammered against her ribs. Her palms were slick with sweat. "Three." They fired together. The shots cracked through the night like thunder. The bear roared, a sound of pure rage and pain, and charged, not away, at them. "Move!" Colt shoved Mara toward the ladder as the bear slammed into the barn wall below them. The entire structure shook. Wood splintered. The loft floor tilted at a sickening angle. Mara scrambled down the ladder, Colt right behind her. They burst out of the barn into the darkness, running for the tree line. Behind them, the bear tore through the barn wall like it was made of paper. "Split up!" Colt shouted. "Make it choose!" They separated, Mara veering left, Colt going right. The bear hesitated for half a second, then charged after Mara. Of course it did. She was slower, smaller, easier prey. Mara ran harder than she'd ever run in her life. Her lungs screamed, her legs burned. Behind her, she could hear the bear gaining ground, its massive paws thundering against the earth. She wasn't going to make it. A gunshot rang out, then another. The bear roared and turned, redirecting toward Colt. Mara spun around just in time to see Colt dive behind a fallen log as the bear charged past him. He fired again, the muzzle flashed bright in the darkness, but the angle was wrong. The bullet went wide. The bear turned for another charge. Mara raised her rifle, hands shaking so badly she could barely aim. "Hey!" she screamed. "Over here!" The bear's head swung toward her. She fired. The shot took the bear in the shoulder, not a killing blow, but enough to make it stumble. It roared in pain and confusion, spinning between its two tormentors, unable to decide which one to kill first. "The neck!" Colt shouted. "Aim for the neck!" Mara fired again. Missed. The rifle's kick nearly knocked her off her feet. Colt fired. The bullet struck the bear's flank, and this time it dropped to 3 legs, bleeding heavily. But it didn't go down. It charged Mara one more time, moving with terrifying speed despite its wounds. Mara stood her ground, aimed carefully, squeezed the trigger. The rifle clicked empty. She'd forgotten to count her shots. Time seemed to slow. The bear was 10 feet away. 8, 6. Then Colt was there, putting himself between Mara and certain death. He fired point blank into the bear's chest. The animal's momentum carried it forward. It crashed into Colt with enough force to send both of them tumbling to the ground in a tangle of fur and limbs. "Colt!" Mara screamed. The bear thrashed, dying but still dangerous. Its claws raked across Colt's side. Its jaws snapped inches from his face. Mara grabbed a fallen branch and swung it with all her strength, striking the bear's head. Again. And again. Until finally, mercifully, the animal went still. The forest fell silent. Mara dropped the branch and scrambled toward Colt. He was pinned beneath the bear's massive body, blood soaking through his shirt. "Help me!" she gasped, grabbing the bear's shoulder. Together they managed to roll the dead weight off him. Colt sat up slowly, wincing. His shirt was torn, 4 parallel claw marks running from his ribs to his hip. The wounds were deep but not fatal. The bear had missed anything vital. "Are you all right?" Mara's hands shook as she examined the cuts. "I've had worse." Colt's voice was strained, but he managed a weak smile. "You?" "I'm fine. Her voice broke. "You almost died." "So did you." He reached up and touched her face gently. "But we didn't. We're both still here." Mara realized she was crying. The tears came hot and fast, a release of all the terror and adrenaline and emotion she'd been holding back. She pressed her hands against her face, trying to stop them, but they kept coming. "Hey." Colt pulled her down beside him, wrapping one arm around her shoulders. "It's all right. We did it. The bear's dead." "You could have been killed," Mara sobbed. "You could have been killed because I forgot to count my shots because I wasn't good enough." "You were perfect." His voice was firm. "You stood your ground when most people would have run. You drew the bear's attention when I was pinned. You saved my life just as much as I saved yours." Mara leaned against him, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her ear. They sat there in the darkness, two people who'd just survived something impossible, holding on to each other like they were the only solid things in the world. Eventually, Colt said, "We should get back. Get these wounds cleaned before they fester." They stood slowly, both of them battered and exhausted. The dead bear lay between them and the barn, massive even in death. Its eyes were open, glassy and unseeing. "I'm sorry," Mara whispered to the animal. "I'm sorry it had to end this way." Colt squeezed her hand. "Come on, let's go home." They made it back to the house just as the first light of dawn touched the eastern mountains. Mara's father was already awake, sitting on the porch with his morning whiskey. He stood as they approached, taking in their torn clothes, their blood-stained hands, the way they were both limping. "Well?" he demanded. "Is it done?" "It's done," Colt said. "The bear's dead. I'll bring you the head tomorrow, after I've rested." Martin's face split into a wide grin. "Excellent. This calls for a celebration. I'll arrange a ceremony in town, a proper announcement." "Not yet." Colt's voice was sharp. "I need to recover first, and we need to make sure there aren't any other bears in the area." "But 1 week," Colt said. "Give me 1 week to heal and make sure the orchard is safe. Then you can have your ceremony." Martin looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Colt's expression made him reconsider. "Fine. 1 week. But I want proof. I want to see that bear's head before you go anywhere." "You'll have it." Martin turned and walked back into the house, already calling for his daughters to share the good news. Mara and Colt stood alone in the yard, the morning sun warming their faces. "Thank you," Mara said quietly, "for everything." Colt looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Don't thank me yet. We still have a ceremony to survive." "What do you mean?" "Your father's going to parade his daughters in front of the whole town and expect me to choose one as my bride." Colt's jaw tightened. "And I have a feeling he's not going to like my choice." Mara's heart stuttered. "Colt, 1 week," he said. "We have 1 week to figure out how to do this right, how to give you a choice instead of just another burden." He touched her cheek gently, the same way he had earlier, and Mara felt something warm and terrifying bloom in her chest. Then he turned and walked toward the barn, leaving her standing in the morning light, wondering if it was possible for someone like her to have something beautiful. The week that followed was strange. Colt stayed in the bunkhouse, recovering from his wounds. Mara brought him fresh bandages and hot food, and they talked about the orchard, about their childhoods, about the futures they'd once imagined for themselves. "I wanted to be a teacher," Mara admitted one afternoon. "When I was young. I loved books, loved learning. My mother used to say I had a scholar's mind." "What stopped you?" "Reality." Mara smiled sadly. "We couldn't afford to send me to school, and even if we could, what school would hire a woman who looks like me? Teaching positions go to refined young ladies who can model proper behavior, not farm girls with calloused hands." Colt was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You could still teach, maybe not in a schoolhouse, but there are other ways. You could teach children to read, help families who can't afford formal education." "In what town? Red Hollow doesn't want anything from me except labor." "Then we find a different town." Colt leaned forward. "I meant what I said before, Mara, about leaving, about starting somewhere new. With you? With me. As partners. Equals. He reached out and took her hand. I know it's not traditional. I know people will talk. But I don't care about traditional, and I've never given a damn what people think. Mara looked down at their joined hands, his scarred and strong, hers rough from work. My father won't allow it. He'll say you're obligated to choose Celeste or Lydia. He'll make a scene. Let him. I've faced down worse than an angry drunk. Colt's thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. The question is, what do you want? What did she want? She wanted to believe that someone could choose her not out of pity or obligation, but because they genuinely valued who she was. She wanted to believe that she could have a life beyond this orchard, beyond her father's contempt and her sister's cruelty. She wanted to believe in the possibility Colt was offering, but believing felt dangerous, like setting herself up for the worst heartbreak of her life. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know what I want anymore. Colt squeezed her hand gently. Then take your time figuring it out. We still have a few days before the ceremony. But time moved faster than Mara wanted it to. Before she knew it, the week was over, and her father was organizing the public ceremony in Red Hollow's town square. Banners were hung. A platform was built. Invitations went out to every family within a day's ride. Martin Bellamy was making sure everyone knew that his gamble had paid off, that the beast was dead, and that one of his beautiful daughters would soon be married to the hero who'd killed it. The morning of the ceremony, Celeste and Lydia spent hours preparing. New dresses, carefully styled hair, practiced smiles. They moved through the house like queens preparing for their coronation, certain that victory was within reach. I think he'll choose me, Celeste said, examining herself in the mirror. I'm the eldest, and I've been very friendly with him. He barely talked to you, Lydia countered. I'm younger, more lively. Men like that. Men like beauty and breeding, which I have more of. They continued bickering, their voices high and sharp. Neither one seemed concerned about the actual man they were fighting over, only about winning. Mara stayed in her storage room trying to calm her racing heart. She'd been told to attend the ceremony but to stay in the background, out of sight. Her father had made that very clear. This is about Celeste and Lydia, he'd said, not you. Don't embarrass me by drawing attention to yourself. So she dressed in her plainest clothes and braided her hair back severely, making herself as invisible as possible. But when Colt arrived at the house to escort the family to town, he looked directly at her. Ready? He asked. Mara couldn't answer. Her throat was too tight. The ride into Red Hollow felt like a funeral procession. Mara sat in the back of the wagon, while Celeste and Lydia flanked Colt on the bench seat, both of them vying for his attention. The town square was packed with people. It seemed like everyone in the territory had come to witness the spectacle. Men stood shoulder to shoulder, drinking and laughing. Women whispered behind their hands, speculating about which daughter would be chosen. The bear's head had been mounted on a pole at the center of the platform, a gruesome trophy, its massive jaws frozen open in a silent roar. Mara's stomach turned at the sight. Her father climbed onto the platform and raised his hands for silence. The crowd gradually quieted, all eyes turning toward him. Friends, Martin boomed. Neighbors, today is a day of celebration. The beast that threatened our community has been slain and justice has been served. Cheers erupted. Someone fired a gun into the air. And now, Martin continued, it's time to honor the man who made this possible. The brave hunter who risked his life to protect our town. Mr. Colt Mercer. More cheers. Colt climbed onto the platform, his face carefully neutral. His wounds had healed well, leaving fresh scars to join the old ones. As promised, Martin said, Mr. Mercer may choose one of my daughters as his bride, a reward worthy of his courage and skill. He gestured, and Celeste and Lydia climbed onto the platform, both of them glowing with confidence. The crowd leaned forward, eager to see which one would be chosen. But then Martin did something Mara hadn't expected. He turned toward the wagon and called out, Mara, come here! The square fell silent. Mara's blood turned to ice. No, he wouldn't. He couldn't. Come now, don't be shy. Martin's voice was jovial, but his eyes were cruel. We mustn't forget, I have 3 daughters, not 2. And a bargain is a bargain. Mr. Mercer may choose one of them, any one of them. The crowd erupted in laughter. Mara climbed down from the wagon on shaking legs, her face burning with humiliation. People were pointing at her, whispering, laughing openly. She heard fragments of conversation, the big one, the one they keep hidden, didn't even know she existed. She walked toward the platform like a woman walking to her execution. Martin grabbed her arm and dragged her up beside her sisters. Celeste and Lydia both smiled, smug, relieved smiles that said they knew exactly what was happening. This was their father's final cruelty, offering Mara as an option while making it clear she was a joke, a punchline, the option no man would ever choose. "So, Mr. Mercer," Martin announced, his arm around Mara's shoulders like they were the best of friends. "What will it be? Which of my lovely daughters catches your eye?" The crowd laughed harder. Someone shouted, "Choose the pretty one." Another voice called out, "Don't be a fool, Mercer." Mara wanted to die, wanted the earth to open up and swallow her whole. She couldn't look at Colt, couldn't bear to see whatever expression was on his face. Then Colt spoke, his voice cutting through the laughter like a blade. "I choose Mara." The square went silent. For a moment nobody moved, nobody breathed. Then the laughter started again, but this time it was uncertain, confused. People looking at each other, wondering if this was part of the joke. Martin's smile faltered. "I'm sorry, what?" "I choose Mara," Colt repeated, louder this time. He looked directly at her, his gray eyes fierce and certain. "If she'll have me." The crowd erupted into chaos. Mara couldn't breathe. The crowd's noise swelled around her like a wave, laughter, shocked exclamations, voices raised in disbelief and mockery. Someone shouted, "He's lost his mind!" Another voice cried, "The bear must have hit him harder than we thought." But Colt didn't waver. He stood there on that platform in front of the entire town, his scarred face set with determination, waiting for her answer. Martin recovered first, his showman's smile snapping back into place, though his eyes had gone cold and hard. "Mr. Mercer, I think perhaps you misunderstood the nature of this bargain. When I offered one of my daughters, I naturally meant—" "You said one of your daughters." Colt's voice cut through the noise like a whip crack. "You didn't specify which one, and I've made my choice. But surely you can see that Celeste or Lydia would make a more suitable—" "I can see perfectly well." Colt turned his full attention to Martin, and there was steel in his gaze. "I've spent 3 weeks hunting that bear. I nearly died killing it, and I fulfilled my end of the bargain exactly as you stated it. So unless you're planning to go back on your word in front of all these witnesses, I suggest you honor it." The crowd had gone quieter now, people leaning in to hear better. This was better than any theater show, better than any traveling circus. The scarred drifter and the forgotten daughter. It was the kind of story people would tell for years. Martin's face flushed deep red. Beside Mara, Celeste made a small, strangled sound of outrage. Lydia's mouth had fallen open in shock. "This is ridiculous," Celeste hissed, loud enough for the front rows to hear. "Father, you can't possibly—" "The man has a right to choose," someone called from the crowd. Old Mr. Patterson, who ran the feed store. "A bargain's a bargain, Martin. Even if the choice is insane," another man added with a laugh. But others were nodding, agreeing that the terms had been clear. Martin had painted himself into a corner with his own words, and everyone could see it. Mara finally found her voice. It came out smaller than she wanted, but steady. "Why?" Colt looked at her, and the noise of the crowd seemed to fade away. "Because you're the bravest person I've ever met. Because you tracked that bear alone for weeks when everyone else told you to give up. Because you stood your ground when it charged, even though you were terrified. Because you see that orchard as something worth protecting, not just something to profit from." He paused. "And because when I look at you, I see a partner, an equal, someone I'd be honored to build a life with." The words hit Mara like physical blows. Not because they hurt, but because they were everything she'd never let herself hope to hear. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "You don't have to choose me out of pity or obligation or—" "I'm not." Colt stepped closer, close enough that only she could hear his next words. "I'm choosing you because I want to. Because somewhere between tracking that bear and nearly dying together, I realized I didn't want to imagine a future without you in it." Mara's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. Not here, not in front of all these people who were waiting to see her break. "I don't know how to be someone's wife," she said. "I don't know how to be anything except what I've always been." "Then we'll figure it out together," Colt held out his hand. What do you say, Mara Bellamy? Will you have me? The entire town square held its breath. Mara looked at his outstretched hand, looked at her father's furious face, looked at her sister's expressions of horror and disgust, looked at the crowd of people who had spent her entire life treating her like she was invisible, or worse, like she was something to be ashamed of. Then she looked back at Colt, at the man who had seen her in the darkness of that orchard and hadn't looked away, who had treated her like she mattered, who had nearly died protecting her, and who was now offering her something she'd thought impossible, a choice. Mara took his hand. The crowd erupted. Some people cheered, mostly those who appreciated the audacity of it. Others laughed, still convinced this was some elaborate joke. A few looked genuinely shocked, like they couldn't believe what they were witnessing. Martin's voice rose above the chaos. This is absurd. I won't allow it. The bargain was meant for— The bargain is fulfilled, Colt said firmly. He turned to address the crowd, his voice carrying across the square. I've chosen my bride according to the terms set forth. If anyone here disputes my right to make that choice, speak now. Silence fell again. Men shifted uncomfortably. Women whispered behind their hands. But no one spoke up to challenge him. The terms had been clear, witnessed by half the territory. Martin had made his grand proclamation, and now he had to live with the consequences. There will be a proper wedding, Colt continued, in 1 week's time. Anyone who wishes to attend is welcome. He looked directly at Martin. I assume you'll want to give your daughter away properly, Mr. Bellamy. It was a challenge wrapped in politeness. Martin could either play the loving father and save face, or he could publicly disown Mara and prove himself a liar and a cheat. Martin's jaw worked silently. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Then, through gritted teeth, he said, Of course, a proper wedding for my daughter. The words sounded like they were being torn from him. Celeste made a sound of disgust and stormed off the platform, pushing through the crowd with Lydia close behind. People parted for them, murmuring sympathetically about the poor beautiful sisters who had been passed over for their unfortunate sibling. Mara stood frozen, Colt's hand still wrapped around hers, unable to fully process what had just happened. She'd gone from being a public joke to being publicly chosen in the span of minutes, and her mind couldn't quite catch up. Come on, Colt said gently. Let's get out of here. He led her off the platform and through the crowd. People stared openly, some with curiosity, others with pity or amusement. Mara heard fragments of conversation as they passed. Poor man doesn't know what he's gotten himself into. Must have hit his head during that hunt. At least she'll be off her father's hands now. Wonder how long before he regrets it. Each comment was a small knife, cutting deeper than the last, but Colt's hand remained steady around hers, an anchor in the storm. They made it to Colt's horse, and he helped her mount behind him. As they rode away from the square, Mara looked back once to see her father still standing on the platform, his face purple with rage, while the bear's head loomed behind him like a grim monument. The ride to Colt's ranch took an hour. It was a small property on the eastern edge of the valley. Nothing fancy. A modest house, a barn, some grazing land for the horses he trained and sold. But it was neat and well-maintained, the kind of place that spoke of a man who took pride in his work. Colt helped her down from the horse and led her inside. The interior was sparse but clean. A kitchen with a wood stove, a sitting area with 2 chairs and a worn rug, a bedroom visible through an open doorway. It's not much, Colt said, suddenly sounding uncertain. But it's paid for, and it's mine. Ours, I mean, if you want it. Mara walked slowly through the space, touching the rough wooden table, the simple curtains on the windows. It was small, plain. Nothing like the grand house she'd grown up in. It was perfect. You really meant it, she said quietly. Everything you said out there. Every word. Why? Mara turned to face him. I need to understand why. I'm not beautiful like my sisters. I'm not refined or educated or any of the things a man is supposed to want in a wife. So why choose me? Colt was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, When I was 18, I worked on a cattle drive down to Texas. There was a woman there, a rancher's daughter. Beautiful as a painting, sweet as honey. I thought I was in love with her. He moved to the window looking out at the mountains. Turned out she was sweet because she'd never had to be anything else. The moment things got hard, the moment her father lost money and couldn't keep her in fancy dresses, she showed her true colors, blamed everyone else for her problems, treated the ranch hands like they were beneath her. Married the first rich man who'd have her and never looked back. Colt turned back to Mara. I learned something that summer. Beauty fades. Sweetness can be an act. But courage? Real strength? The kind that shows up when everything's falling apart and keeps fighting anyway? That's rare. That's valuable. And that's what I see when I look at you. Mara felt her throat tighten. I'm not that strong. I let my father treat me like dirt for years. I let my sisters mock me. I never fought back. You survived, Colt said. That took strength. And when the time came to stand up, when I asked you to come hunting, when that bear charged, when I offered you a choice today, you didn't back down. You chose courage even when it terrified you. I'm still terrified, Mara whispered. So am I. Colt crossed the room to stand in front of her. I've never done this before, never asked someone to build a life with me, never let myself care about anyone enough to risk it, but I'm willing to try if you are. Mara looked up at him, this scarred stranger who had somehow become the most important person in her world. What if I'm not good at being a wife? What if I disappoint you? What if you don't? Colt reached up and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. What if we're actually good together? What if we build something better than either of us could have alone? It was such a foreign concept, the idea that she could be good at something other than enduring, that she could be wanted for who she was, not despite it. I don't know how to do this, Mara said. Neither do I, but we've got a week to figure it out before the wedding. Colt's mouth quirked into a small smile. And if we can survive a bear hunt together, I figure we can survive just about anything. Despite everything, Mara found herself smiling back. That's a low bar. I'm a simple man with simple standards. They stood there in the fading afternoon light, neither quite sure what came next, but both willing to find out. You should go back to the house, Colt said finally. Get your things. Say whatever goodbyes you need to say. Then come back here, and we'll start planning the wedding. My father's going to make this as difficult as possible. Let him try. Colt's expression hardened. He made his bargain in front of witnesses. He can't back out now without destroying his reputation, and that's the one thing Martin Bellamy cares about more than anything. Mara knew he was right. Her father would rage and scheme and make everyone around him miserable, but he wouldn't risk being seen as a man who broke his word, not in a frontier town where a man's honor was everything. I'll come back tomorrow, she said, with my mother's things. Your mother's things? The only possessions I care about. Her books, her journals, the seeds she saved from the original orchard. Mara's voice grew quiet. She wanted to expand the orchard someday, plant different varieties, create something lasting. Then we will, Colt said. We've got land here. Not as much as your family's property, but enough. We can plant an orchard together, make her dream real. The tears Mara had been holding back finally spilled over, but they weren't tears of sadness or shame. They were something else entirely. Relief, maybe. Or hope. Colt pulled her into his arms, and Mara let herself lean against him, feeling the solid warmth of another human being who actually wanted her there. Thank you, she whispered against his chest. For what? For seeing me. His arms tightened around her. Always. The ride back to the Bellamy house felt like traveling to a different world. Mara had only been gone a few hours, but everything had changed. She was no longer the unwanted daughter who lived in the shadows. She was Colt Mercer's chosen bride, and that simple fact altered how she moved through space. The house was dark when she arrived. No welcoming lights in the windows, no sounds of her family going about their evening routines. Mara dismounted and approached slowly, a knot of dread forming in her stomach. The door burst open before she could knock. Celeste stood in the doorway, her beautiful face twisted with rage. How dare you show your face here? I live here, Mara said evenly. Or I did. I came to collect my belongings. You humiliated us, Celeste's voice rose to a shriek. Do you have any idea what people are saying? They're laughing at us, Mara, laughing because the ugly sister got chosen over us. I didn't ask to be chosen. You must have done something, said something to manipulate him. What did you promise him, Mara? What did you do out there in those woods? The implication was clear and vile. Mara felt her face burn. I hunted a bear, that's all. Liar! Celeste stepped forward, her hand raised to strike, but a voice from inside the house stopped her. Enough, Celeste. Their father appeared in the doorway. He looked older than he had that morning, his face haggard and drawn. The smell of whiskey hung heavy around him. Let her in, Martin said. Let her collect her things and go. Celeste stepped aside reluctantly. Mara entered the house she'd grown up in, but it felt foreign now. The familiar room seemed smaller, darker, suffocating. She went directly to her storage room and began gathering her mother's possessions. The journals filled with planting notes and harvest records. The books her mother had loved, poetry and philosophy and natural science. The small wooden box containing seeds carefully labeled and saved. As she worked, her father appeared in the doorway. "You've made a terrible mistake," he said quietly. Mara didn't look up. "I don't think so. He'll tire of you. Maybe not right away, but eventually. Men always do." Martin leaned against the door frame. "And when he does, when he realizes what he's actually married to, you'll have nowhere to go. You'll have given up everything for nothing." "I had nothing to give up." Mara closed the box of seeds carefully. "You made sure of that. I gave you a home, food, work that gave you purpose. You gave me a cage." Mara finally looked at him. "And you called it kindness because the bars were invisible." Martin's expression flickered. Surprise, maybe, that she would speak to him so directly. Then it hardened again. "The orchard belongs to this family. Those seeds, those journals, they stay here. They belong to my mother. Your mother is dead, and everything she owned became mine when she died." "Actually," a new voice said from the doorway, "that's not quite true." Mara and Martin both turned to find a man she didn't recognize, middle-aged, well-dressed, carrying a leather satchel. He had the look of a professional about him, a lawyer, perhaps, or a banker. "Who the hell are you?" Martin demanded. "Thomas Whitmore, attorney at law from Carson City." The man stepped into the small room, making it feel even more cramped. "I apologize for the late hour, but I felt this matter couldn't wait. I've been trying to track down the Bellamy family for some time." "We don't need a lawyer," Martin said. "Perhaps not, but Miss Mara Bellamy certainly does." Whitmore turned to Mara. "I represent the estate of one Margaret Ann Bellamy. Your mother, I believe?" Mara's heart stuttered. "My mother's estate? But she died 15 years ago." "Indeed, and her will has been sitting in probate all this time due to some administrative complications. But those complications have recently been resolved, and I'm here to execute her final wishes." Whitmore pulled a sheaf of papers from his satchel. "Your mother owned significant property before her marriage, Miss Bellamy. Property that was meant to pass to you upon your 21st birthday." The room went very quiet. Martin's face had gone pale. "That's impossible. Everything Margaret owned became part of the family holdings when we married. Actually, no." Whitmore's tone was polite but firm. "Mrs. Bellamy's father was quite specific in his will. The land he left to his daughter was to remain in her name alone, held in trust for any daughters she might have. Your wife could use the land during her lifetime, Mr. Bellamy, but she could not transfer ownership to you, and upon her death, it was to pass directly to her female heirs." He handed the papers to Mara. "This orchard, Miss Bellamy, the one you've been maintaining all these years, it legally belongs to you. It has belonged to you since you turned 21 3 years ago." Mara stared at the documents in her hands, the words swimming before her eyes. Legal terms, property descriptions, her mother's signature, neat and precise, dated just weeks before she died. "That can't be right," Martin said, but his voice had lost its conviction. "The orchard is mine. I've been managing it for 15 years. Managing it, yes, but not owning it." Whitmore pulled out another document. "I have the original deed here, signed by Margaret's father. The land was never yours, Mr. Bellamy. You've been, in essence, a caretaker, and not a particularly good one, from what I understand." "This is fraud," Martin sputtered. "This is some kind of—" "This is the law." Whitmore's voice hardened. "And if you'd like to contest it, I'm happy to take this matter before a judge. Though I should warn you, attempting to claim property that doesn't belong to you tends to go poorly in court, especially when there's documentation going back 3 generations." Mara couldn't speak, couldn't move. The papers in her hands felt impossibly heavy, as if they weighed more than the entire world. The orchard was hers, had always been hers, and her father had known. She looked up at Martin, and the guilt written across his face confirmed everything. You knew, she whispered. All these years. You knew it belonged to me, and you kept me working like a servant on my own land. It was for the family, Martin said, but the words sounded hollow. For all of us. I couldn't let you. You were just a child when your mother died. You didn't understand business, or I was 21 3 years ago. You could have told me then. And what would you have done? Run off? Sold the land? You had no idea what you were doing. So you lied instead. Mara's hands trembled, but her voice stayed steady. You let me believe I was worthless, that I should be grateful for the scraps you gave me, when all along I was the owner and you were the thief. Now see here. No. Mara stood up, clutching the papers to her chest. I'm done listening to you. I'm taking what's mine, my mother's journals, her seeds, her books, and the orchard, all of it. You can't just take the orchard. What about your sisters? What about them? Mara's voice cracked. Did you think about me when you paraded them in town and offered them as prizes? Did you think about me when you dragged me onto that platform as a joke? Did you think about me any of the thousands of times you made me feel like I was less than nothing? Martin had no answer. Whitmore cleared his throat. Miss Bellamy, I should mention that as the legal owner, you have every right to remove any unauthorized persons from your property, including family members. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Mara looked at her father, this man who had spent 15 years stealing from her, lying to her, breaking her down piece by piece. She should have felt rage, should have wanted revenge. Instead, she just felt tired. You can stay, she said quietly. You and Celeste and Lydia, until you find somewhere else to go. I won't throw you out in the dark like you would have done to me. How generous, Martin said bitterly. It's more than you deserve. Mara turned to Whitmore. Thank you for finding me, for bringing this information. It's my duty, Miss Bellamy, though I am sorry it took so long. Whitmore tipped his hat. I'll file the necessary paperwork with the county recorder tomorrow. By this time next week, the transfer will be official and public record. He left, taking the suffocating tension with him. Mara gathered the last of her mother's belongings and walked toward the door. Her father didn't move, didn't try to stop her. But as she reached the threshold, he said, He'll leave you, that drifter. Once he learns about the orchard, once he realizes what you're worth, he'll find a way to take it from you, just like I did. Mara paused. Then without turning around, she said, The difference is Colt chose me before he knew about the land, before he knew I was worth anything at all. You never saw me as anything but a resource to exploit. So no, father, he's nothing like you. She walked out of the house and didn't look back. The ride back to Colt's ranch took place under a sky full of stars. Mara's mind spun with everything that had happened, trying to process it all, and failing. The ceremony, Colt's choice. The lawyer's revelation, her father's guilt. It was too much, too big. She arrived at the ranch to find Colt waiting on the porch, a lantern lit beside him. He stood as she dismounted. I was starting to worry, he said. Then he saw her face. What happened? Mara told him everything. The words spilled out in a rush, the lawyer, the documents, the orchard that had been hers all along. Colt listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. When she finished, he said, Your father kept you working your own land as unpaid labor for 3 years. Longer than that, really, since my mother died. That son of a... Colt bit off the curse. What do you want to do? About what? About all of it. The orchard, your family, us. Colt stepped closer. Because this changes things, Mara. You're not just a farmer's daughter anymore. You're a landowner, a woman of property. You don't need to marry anyone. You can run that orchard yourself, hire help, build whatever life you want. Mara understood what he was doing, giving her an out, making sure she knew she had choices. The orchard doesn't change how I feel, she said quietly. How do you feel? It was the first time he'd asked directly, the first time he'd pushed for an answer she hadn't given. Mara took a breath. Terrified, confused, overwhelmed. She looked up at him. But when I'm with you, I feel like maybe I can handle all of it, like maybe I'm not alone anymore. Colt's expression softened. You're not alone. Not as long as you don't want to be. I don't want to be. The words came easier than she expected. I don't want to go back to that house. I don't want to run the orchard by myself. I don't want a life that looks anything like what I had before. What do you want? This. Mara gestured at the ranch, at him, at the life they were standing on the edge of. I want to try this. With you. As partners. Even though it scares you. Especially because it scares me. Mara smiled slightly. Someone once told me that choosing courage even when you're terrified is what makes you strong. Colt's mouth quirked. Sounds like a wise person. He has his moments. They stood there in the lamplight, two broken people who had somehow found each other in the wilderness. The week ahead would bring challenges. A wedding to plan? A family to confront? A whole town's worth of gossip to endure. But for now, in this moment, Mara let herself believe that maybe things could actually work out, that maybe she deserved to be chosen, that maybe, finally, she had found her way home. The news spread through Red Hollow faster than wildfire. By noon the next day, everyone within 20 miles knew that Mara Bellamy, the forgotten daughter, the one they'd laughed at on that platform, was the true owner of the most valuable orchard in the territory. The whispers that had mocked her just yesterday now carried a different tone entirely. Mara heard about it from Mrs. Mackey at the general store, where she'd gone to purchase fabric for a wedding dress. "My dear girl," Mrs. Mackey gushed, her entire demeanor transformed from the cool indifference she'd shown Mara for years. "I always knew there was something special about you. Always said so, didn't I? Such a shame your father kept you hidden away like that. But now everyone can see what I've known all along." Mara doubted Mrs. Mackey had ever said anything of the sort, but she kept her expression neutral. "I need 8 yards of the cream cotton, please, and thread to match." "Getting married in cotton?" Mrs. Mackey's nose wrinkled slightly. "Surely now that you're a woman of property, you could afford something finer. I have a beautiful silk that just came in from San Francisco, perfect for a bride of your standing. The cotton will do. But Mr. Mercer will want his bride to look— Mr. Mercer will want his bride to be comfortable," Mara interrupted quietly. "The cotton, please." Mrs. Mackey's smile tightened, but she measured out the fabric without further comment. As she wrapped it, she said, "I suppose you'll be hiring help for that orchard now? My nephew's looking for work, and he's a strong boy, very reliable. I'll keep that in mind. And of course, if you need any advice on managing property, my husband would be happy to—" "Thank you, Mrs. Mackey. That'll be all." Mara paid and left, carrying her package through the town square. Everywhere she looked, people were staring. Some nodded respectfully. Others whispered behind their hands. A few men who had never so much as glanced at her before now tipped their hats as she passed. It was nauseating. These were the same people who had laughed 3 days ago. The same ones who had treated her like she was invisible. Or worse, like she was something to be pitied. And now they smiled and nodded and acted as though they'd always recognized her worth. As if her value had only materialized the moment they learned she owned land. She was halfway to her horse when a voice called out behind her. "Miss Bellamy! A word, if you please." Mara turned to find Mayor Hutchins hurrying toward her, his round face flushed from the effort. He was a portly man who loved the sound of his own voice, and had never once acknowledged her existence before. "Mayor Hutchins," she said evenly, "I wanted to personally congratulate you on your upcoming nuptials," he said, slightly out of breath, "and to discuss a matter of some importance to the town. I'm in rather a hurry. This won't take long." He fell into step beside her, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "You see, the town council has been discussing the possibility of expanding our agricultural initiatives. With your orchard being the most productive in the region, we thought perhaps you might be interested in partnering with the town on a cooperative venture." "What kind of venture?" "Well, we'd provide additional resources, equipment, labor, marketing assistance, and in return, the town would receive a percentage of the profits. It would be mutually beneficial, you see. Help you maximize your yields while supporting the local economy." Mara stopped walking. "You want me to give the town a cut of my orchard's profits in exchange for help I don't need?" Hutchins' smile faltered. "Well, when you put it that way, it sounds like you're trying to take advantage of someone you think is too ignorant to recognize a bad deal." Mara's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. "I've been running that orchard myself for 3 years while my father drank away the profits. I don't need the town's equipment or labor, and I certainly don't need your advice. Miss Bellamy, I assure you we only have your best interests." "No, you have the town's interests, which is fine. That's your job. But my answer is no, Mayor. The orchard stays independent. She walked away, leaving the mayor sputtering behind her. Her hands were shaking from anger or fear or some combination of both, but she kept her stride steady until she reached her horse. This was what her life would be now, she realized. People who had ignored her for years suddenly wanting something from her, treating her with a respect that was entirely conditional on what she could provide them. It made her father's cruelty seem almost honest by comparison. At least he'd never pretended to respect her. Mara rode back to Colt's ranch, her mind churning. She found him in the barn, repairing a broken saddle. He looked up as she entered, and whatever he saw on her face made him set down his tools immediately. What happened? She told him about Mrs. Mackey's sudden friendliness, about the mayor's proposal, about the way everyone in town had looked at her with new eyes that had nothing to do with who she actually was. "They don't see me," Mara said, her voice tight with frustration. "They just see the orchard, the property. They're doing exactly what my father did, treating me like I'm only valuable because of what I own." Colt listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "What do you want to do about it?" "I don't know. I thought finding out the truth would change things, would make me feel, I don't know, vindicated? Powerful?" She laughed bitterly. "Instead, I just feel like a different kind of commodity." "You're not a commodity." Colt moved closer. "And anyone who treats you like one isn't worth your time." "That's the whole town, Colt." "Then to hell with the town." He said it simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "We don't need them. We've got the ranch, we've got the orchard, and we've got each other. That's enough." "Is it?" Mara looked at him. "You grew up here. These are your people. Can you really just turn your back on all of them? I've been turning my back on places my whole life." Colt's scarred face was serious. "I learned a long time ago that home isn't about where you're from. It's about who you choose to be with. And I'm choosing you, Mara, not your orchard, not your property. You." The word settled over her like a warm blanket, pushing back some of the cold anger that had been building in her chest. "I got the fabric," she said quietly. "For the dress." "Good." Colt's expression softened slightly. "Though I'd marry you in work clothes if that's what you wanted. I think Mrs. Mackey would die of scandal." "Even better." Despite everything, Mara smiled. "You're terrible. You're the one marrying me. What does that say about you?" "That I have questionable judgment." "Probably." Colt reached out and took her hand. "But we'll figure it out together. All of it. The town, your family, the orchard, one day at a time." It was such a simple promise. But somehow, coming from him, it felt like enough. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Mara worked on her dress in the evenings, stitching by lamplight, while Colt read aloud from one of her mother's books. They talked about plans for the ranch, about where they might plant the new orchard trees, about the kind of life they wanted to build. But beneath the tentative happiness, tension simmered, because the wedding was scheduled for Saturday, and everyone in Red Hollow would be watching. On Thursday afternoon, Mara returned to the Bellamy house one final time. She needed to collect the last of her mother's belongings and formally claim the orchard as her own. She found her father in his study, surrounded by ledgers and empty bottles. He looked up as she entered, his eyes bloodshot and hollow. "Come to gloat?" he asked. "I came to get my mother's recipe books, and to tell you that you have until the end of the month to find new lodging." Martin's laugh was harsh and bitter. "So generous, giving me 3 weeks to vacate the property I've maintained for 15 years. "The property you stole," Mara corrected. "And yes, 3 weeks is generous. It's more time than you ever gave me to prepare for anything." "I gave you a home, a purpose. You gave me a cage and called it kindness." Mara moved to the shelf where her mother's recipe books were kept. "I'm done arguing about this, Father. The law is clear. The orchard is mine. You can leave peacefully, or I can have the sheriff remove you. Your choice." "And your sisters? What becomes of them? They can make their own choices. They're grown women, not children." Mara pulled the books down, running her fingers over the worn covers. "Though I noticed you didn't think about their welfare when you were spending the orchard's profits on whiskey." Martin was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Your mother would be ashamed of you." The words were meant to hurt, and they did. But Mara had learned something over the past few days. She'd learned that pain didn't have to control her, that she could feel it and keep moving forward anyway. "My mother," Mara said quietly, "made sure I would inherit this land specifically so I wouldn't be at the mercy of men like you. She knew exactly what kind of father you were, and she protected me the only way she could. She walked out, leaving her father alone with his bitterness and his bottles. Celeste was waiting in the hallway, her beautiful face twisted with resentment. "You're destroying this family," she hissed. "This family destroyed itself long before I found out the truth." Mara tried to move past her, but Celeste stepped into her path. "Do you really think he loves you, that drifter? He's using you, Mara. He'll take control of the orchard and cast you aside the moment it's convenient." "That's what you would do," Mara said. "It doesn't mean everyone else operates the same way. You're naive. You always have been." Celeste's eyes glittered with malice. "You think being a landowner makes you special? Makes you worthy? You're still the same ugly, awkward girl you've always been. The only difference is now you have something people want." The words should have cut deep. A week ago, they would have. But Mara had spent too much time lately with someone who saw her differently. Someone who valued her for reasons that had nothing to do with property or beauty or social standing. "You're right," Mara said calmly. "I am the same person I've always been, strong enough to do the work no one else would do, smart enough to see through your manipulations, brave enough to choose my own path, even when people like you told me I should be grateful for scraps." She stepped around her sister. "And you know what else? I'm happy. For the first time in my life, I'm actually happy. Can you say the same?" Celeste's perfect face contorted with rage, but she had no answer. Mara walked out of the house for the last time, carrying her mother's books and the weight of a family she was finally free from. Friday evening, the night before the wedding, Mara stood in Colt's kitchen finishing the last stitches on her dress. It wasn't fancy, just simple cream cotton with long sleeves and a modest neckline. But it was hers, made by her own hands, chosen by her own will. Colt had gone into town to pick up the supplies they'd need for the small reception after the ceremony. Mara had wanted something quiet, just a few close friends, but word had spread and now it seemed like half the territory planned to attend. She was threading her needle for the final hem when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses, moving fast. Mara set down her sewing and moved to the window. What she saw made her blood run cold. Her father's wagon, with Martin at the reins. Behind him, at least 6 men on horseback. She recognized a few of them, ranch hands from neighboring properties, men her father drank with, rough types who'd do just about anything for the right price. They were armed. Mara's hands went numb. She ran to where Colt kept his rifle, checking to make sure it was loaded. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the wagon pulled up to the house. Martin climbed down, swaying slightly, drunk. Of course he was drunk. "Mara," he bellowed, "come out here!" She stayed inside, rifle held steady, watching through the window. "I know you're in there," Martin shouted. "We need to talk about this wedding, about the orchard, about your future." One of the men with him laughed. "She's scared, Martin, hiding like she always does. Get out here, girl, or we'll come in and drag you out." Mara moved to the door and opened it, stepping onto the porch with the rifle visible in her hands. "You're trespassing. Leave, now." Martin's eyes focused on the weapon and he laughed. "Going to shoot your own father? I don't think so." "I'll shoot anyone who tries to force their way into this house." Mara's voice was steadier than she felt. "The law is on my side, Father. You have no claim to this property or to me." "The law," Martin spat into the dirt. "The law is whatever men with power say it is. And you don't have power, Mara. You have a piece of paper and a drifter who will abandon you the first chance he gets." "What do you want?" "I want you to see reason." Martin climbed the porch steps and Mara raised the rifle. He stopped, but didn't retreat. "This marriage is a mistake. You're throwing away your future for a man you barely know. Let me help you see that. By bringing armed men to threaten me the night before my wedding? By protecting you from making the biggest mistake of your life." Martin's voice took on a wheedling tone. "Come home, Mara. We can work this out. You can run the orchard. I'll help you, teach you what you need to know. We can be a family again." "We were never a family. You made sure of that." "You ungrateful—" Martin's mask slipped, revealing the rage beneath. "I gave you everything. A home, food, purpose. And this is how you repay me? By throwing me out and marrying some scarred nobody?" "You gave me nothing but pain and lies." Mara's finger tightened on the trigger. "Now get off this property before you what?" One of the men behind Martin moved forward. Shoot all of us? I don't think so, sweetheart. They were spreading out, surrounding the porch. Mara's stomach dropped. She could maybe fire one shot, maybe two, but then they'd be on her. And there were too many of them. She was trapped. Then a voice cut through the darkness like a blade. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Everyone turned. Colt stood at the edge of the property, his own rifle raised, flanked by 5 men Mara recognized from town. Old Mr. Patterson from the feed store. 2 of the ranch hands who'd helped with the bear hunt. The blacksmith. And Sheriff Monroe himself, his badge glinting in the lamplight. This is a private matter, Martin said, but the bluster had gone out of his voice. This is an armed group threatening a woman on her own property, Sheriff Monroe said calmly. That's a crime, and I witnessed it, so I suggest you all mount up and head home before I start making arrests. She's my daughter. She's a grown woman who owns this land legally. The sheriff's voice hardened. You've got no business here, Martin, and bringing armed men to intimidate her the night before her wedding? That's about as low as it gets. For a moment, Mara thought her father might actually argue, might push this to violence. But then he looked at the men flanking Colt, at the sheriff's hand resting casually on his sidearm, and whatever fight he'd brought with him deflated. This isn't over, Martin said, his eyes locked on Mara. Yes, Colt said quietly. It is. Martin and his men mounted up and rode away, leaving nothing but dust and the echo of hoofbeats. Mara's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the porch steps, the rifle clattering beside her. Colt was there in an instant, kneeling beside her. Are you hurt? No, I just... Her voice shook. There were so many of them. I thought... I know. He pulled her against him. But you're safe now, I promise. Sheriff Monroe approached, removing his hat. Miss Bellamy, I apologize for not acting sooner. I should have anticipated your father might try something like this. How did you know to come? Mara asked. We didn't. The sheriff nodded toward Colt. Your fiancé came to find me in town, said he had a bad feeling about leaving you alone tonight. Asked if I'd ride out with him just to make sure everything was all right. Turned out his instincts were good. Mara looked at Colt, something warm and overwhelming swelling in her chest. Thank you. Always, he said simply. After the sheriff and the other men left, Mara and Colt sat together on the porch in the darkness. The stars wheeled overhead, cold and distant and uncaring. But here, in this small circle of lamplight, Mara felt safer than she had in years. I'm sorry, she said quietly. About my father. About all of this. You have nothing to apologize for. You didn't choose your family. No, but I'm choosing you. Mara turned to look at him. Tomorrow, in front of everyone, I'm choosing you. And I need you to know that it's not because of the orchard or the property or any kind of obligation. It's because when I look at my future, the only version of it that doesn't terrify me is the one with you in it. Colt was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I've been alone most of my life, told myself I preferred it that way. That attachments made you weak, made you vulnerable. He reached out and took her hand. Then I met you, and I realized being alone wasn't strength. It was just lonely. So we're both taking a risk. A calculated risk. His mouth quirked into a slight smile. We survived a bear hunt together. Marriage can't be that much harder. That's what you said last time. And I was right, wasn't I? Despite everything, Mara laughed. It felt good, clean, like washing away the last remnants of her father's poison. They sat together until the moon rose, talking about nothing and everything, 2 people on the edge of something new and terrifying and maybe, just maybe, beautiful. And when Mara finally went to bed for the first time in her life, she fell asleep without being afraid of tomorrow. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and cold, the kind of autumn day where the sun felt warm, but the shadows held winter's promise. Mara woke before sunrise, her heart already racing with anticipation and nerves that had nothing to do with fear. She dressed slowly in the cream cotton dress she'd made, her fingers trembling slightly as she fastened the buttons. The fabric was soft against her skin, comfortable in a way the fancy dresses her sisters wore never were. She'd chosen function over beauty, simplicity over spectacle. And looking at herself in the small mirror, she was surprised to find she didn't mind what she saw. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, still damp from washing. Her face was the same as it had always been, Broad features, strong jaw, her mother's eyes. Not beautiful by any conventional measure, but for the first time in her life, Mara looked at her reflection and didn't feel shame. She looked like someone who had survived, someone who had chosen her own path, someone who was about to marry a man who wanted her exactly as she was. That was enough. A knock on the door startled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Mrs. Patterson, the feed store owner's wife, standing on the porch with a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "I hope I'm not too early," the older woman said kindly, "but I wanted to bring you something before the ceremony." "Mrs. Patterson, you didn't have to." "Hush now. A bride should have something special on her wedding day." She unwrapped the bundle to reveal a delicate wreath of autumn wildflowers, golden asters, purple sage, and deep red maple leaves woven together with careful hands. "For your hair, if you'd like." Mara's throat tightened. "It's beautiful." "You saved my grandson, you know," Mrs. Patterson said quietly. 3 years ago. He fell through the ice on Miller's Pond, and you pulled him out, gave him your coat, and carried him home, even though it was 2 miles in the freezing cold." Mara remembered. A skinny boy, blue-lipped and terrified. She'd been checking the irrigation channels when she heard him screaming. "I was just there," Mara said. "Anyone would have—" "No." Mrs. Patterson's voice was firm. "Not anyone. Most people would have worried about getting wet themselves, about catching their death of cold. But you didn't hesitate. You just jumped in and saved him." She placed the wreath gently in Mara's hands. "I never forgot that. And I never forgot how your father took credit for it. Told everyone he'd raised you to be useful in emergencies. Like saving my boy's life was just another chore you'd completed." Mara didn't know what to say. "What I'm trying to tell you," Mrs. Patterson continued, "is that some of us have been watching. Some of us saw who you really were, even when your family tried to keep you hidden, and we're glad you're finally getting the life you deserve." She helped Mara pin the wreath into her hair, arranging it carefully. When she finished, she stepped back with a satisfied nod. "There, now you look like a bride." After Mrs. Patterson left, others began arriving. Women Mara barely knew, bringing small gifts, a jar of honey, an embroidered handkerchief, a bottle of lavender water. Each one had a story, a memory of some small kindness Mara had shown them that she'd long forgotten. The girl she'd taught to read when the school teacher refused because her family couldn't pay. The widow whose fence she'd repaired after a storm. The young mother she'd helped deliver vegetables to when she was bedridden with illness. All these tiny moments scattered across years that Mara had never thought twice about, but they had remembered. By the time Colt arrived to escort her to town, Mara's small room was full of flowers and well wishes from people who had been invisible to her, just as she'd been invisible to them. The forgotten and overlooked of Red Hollow, quietly building their own community in the shadows. "Ready?" Colt asked. He wore his best shirt and a new vest, his hair combed back, his scarred face cleanly shaved. He looked nervous, which somehow made Mara feel better about her own nerves. "I think so," she said. "Are you?" "Terrified," he admitted with a slight smile. "But that seems appropriate." They rode into town together, side by side. The streets were already filling with people, far more than Mara had expected. The ceremony was set to take place in the town square, where just days ago she'd stood as a public joke. Today, she would stand there and choose her own future. The crowd parted as they approached. Mara saw familiar faces. Mrs. Mackey trying to look dignified, Mayor Hutchins puffing out his chest importantly, Sheriff Monroe standing watch to ensure there would be no trouble, and scattered throughout, the people who had come to her room this morning, the quiet ones who smiled at her with genuine warmth. Her father was nowhere to be seen. Neither were her sisters. Part of Mara felt their absence like a wound. Despite everything they'd done, they were still her family. Some part of her had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that they might come, that they might witness this moment and feel something other than resentment. But their absence was its own kind of freedom. The minister waited on the platform, the same one where Martin had made his cruel joke. Mara and Colt climbed the steps together, and the crowd gradually quieted. Mara's hands were shaking. Colt reached out and took them in his own, steady and warm. The minister began the traditional words, but Mara barely heard them. She was too focused on Colt's gray eyes, on the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the world that mattered. When it came time for the vows, Colt spoke first. "I'm not good with fancy words," he said, his voice carrying across the square. "But I can promise you this. I'll stand beside you when things are hard. I'll see you for who you are, not what people expect you to be. I'll choose you every day, not because I have to, but because there's no one else I'd rather choose." The words were simple, honest, everything Mara had learned to value. Then it was her turn. She took a breath, feeling the weight of all those watching eyes, and spoke from her heart. "I spent most of my life believing I wasn't worth choosing, that the best I could hope for was to be useful, to be tolerated, to take up as little space as possible." Her voice grew stronger. "You taught me that I was wrong, that courage and strength and loyalty are worth something, that I'm worth something. So I promise you this. I'll be your partner in everything. I'll work beside you, fight beside you, build a life beside you. And I'll never stop being grateful that you saw me when everyone else looked away." Colt's eyes were bright with emotion. He squeezed her hands gently. The minister pronounced them married, and Colt leaned in to kiss her. It was brief and gentle, more promise than passion, but it sent warmth flooding through Mara's entire body. The crowd erupted in applause. Not the mocking laughter of before, but genuine celebration. People cheered and whistled, and someone fired a gun into the air in the frontier tradition. Mara and Colt descended the platform as husband and wife, and people pressed forward to offer congratulations. Mrs. Patterson wiped tears from her eyes. Old Mr. Patterson shook Colt's hand vigorously. Sheriff Monroe tipped his hat with a knowing smile. "Speech," someone called. "Let's hear from the bride." The crowd took up the call, and Mara felt panic rise in her throat. She'd never spoken publicly before, never addressed more than one or two people at a time. Colt squeezed her hand. "You don't have to," he murmured. But Mara looked out at the assembled crowd, at the mix of genuine well-wishers and opportunists, at the people who'd known her all her life and the ones who were only now pretending to see her, and she realized she had something to say after all. She raised her hand for quiet, and surprisingly, they gave it to her. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice stronger than she expected. "I know many of you are here because you're curious, because you want to see how this story ends. The forgotten daughter marrying the scarred drifter. I know some of you think we're making a mistake, that we barely know each other, that this won't last." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "And maybe you're right," Mara continued. "Maybe this is a mistake. Maybe we'll struggle and fight and wonder what we were thinking. But here's what I know for certain. I'd rather take a risk on something real than spend the rest of my life playing it safe and being miserable. I'd rather choose my own path and fail than let other people choose for me and succeed at a life I never wanted." She looked at Colt, then back at the crowd. "This man chose me when he could have had anyone, not because of what I own, but because of who I am, and I'm choosing him for the same reason. So whether this works out or not, at least we'll know we chose each other freely. That's more than most people can say." The crowd was silent for a beat. Then someone started clapping, then another, and another, until the whole square was applauding, and Mara realized with a start that she'd just given her first public speech, and she hadn't collapsed. The reception was held at the town hall, a simple affair with food and drink and music from a fiddle player who knew exactly 3 songs. Mara and Colt moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes, dancing when the music called for it. It was during their second dance that Mara saw them. Her sisters stood at the edge of the crowd, both dressed in their finest, both looking distinctly uncomfortable. Celeste's face was pinched with something that might have been regret. Lydia wouldn't meet Mara's eyes. The music ended, and before Mara could decide whether to approach them, Celeste crossed the room. "Mara," she said stiffly, "could we speak privately?" Mara glanced at Colt, who nodded. She followed her sisters outside into the cool evening air, her heart hammering with uncertainty. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Celeste said, "Father's gone. He left town this morning, took what money he could scrape together and disappeared." Mara felt nothing. No relief, no sadness. Just emptiness where her father should have been. "And you?" she asked. "We're leaving too," Lydia said quietly. "Going to Denver. Celeste has a friend there who runs a dress shop. She's offered us work." "Honest work," Celeste added, and there was something bitter in her tone. "The kind we always thought we were too good for. They stood in uncomfortable silence, three sisters who barely knew each other despite growing up in the same house. "I'm sorry," Celeste said finally, the words coming out strained. "For everything. For the way we treated you. For the things we said. You didn't deserve any of it." It was the closest thing to an apology Mara had ever received from her sister. "No," Mara agreed. "I didn't." "Are you going to forgive us?" Lydia asked, her voice small. Mara thought about it. About all the years of cruelty and mockery, the casual humiliations, the way they'd stood by and watched their father break her down piece by piece. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Maybe someday, but not today." Celeste nodded, unsurprised. "That's fair." "I hope Denver treats you well," Mara said. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for." "I hope you're happy," Lydia said, and for the first time she sounded like she meant it. "You deserve to be happy." They left without saying goodbye, disappearing into the darkness. Mara stood alone, processing this final severance from her family, feeling the weight of it and the strange lightness that came after. Colt found her a few minutes later. "Everything all right?" "They're leaving, all of them. I'm alone now." "No," Colt said gently, pulling her close. "You're free. There's a difference." And standing there in his arms, Mara realized he was right. The celebration wound down as the evening grew late. People drifted home, leaving Mara and Colt to clean up with the help of a few dedicated souls. By the time they finished, the moon was high and the streets were quiet. They rode back to the ranch together, Mara's head resting against Colt's shoulder, exhaustion settling into her bones like a comfortable weight. "Mrs. Mercer," Colt said, testing out the name. "That's going to take some getting used to," Mara admitted. "We've got time." At the ranch, Colt started a fire in the hearth while Mara changed out of her wedding dress. When she emerged in her work clothes, he smiled. "More comfortable?" "Much." They sat together by the fire, watching the flames dance, neither feeling the need to fill the silence with words. Outside, an owl hooted in the darkness. The horses moved restlessly in the barn. The world continued on, indifferent to the small revolution that had taken place in their lives. "What happens now?" Mara asked eventually. "Now we figure out how to run 2 properties. We plant your mother's orchard. We survive the winter. We build something that lasts." Colt looked at her. "One day at a time, together." "It sounds hard." "It probably will be. But I'd rather face hard things with you than easy things with anyone else." Mara leaned against him, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for letting me." They stayed up talking late into the night, making plans for the future. They would combine the 2 properties, use Colt's expertise with horses and Mara's knowledge of orchards to create something unique. They'd hire help, people who needed work and would appreciate fair treatment. They'd expand the peach orchard using her mother's saved seeds. But they'd also try new varieties, experiment with apples and pears. It wouldn't be easy. There would be hard winters and failed crops and people who would continue to judge them, but they would face it together, as partners, as equals. As the fire burned down to embers, Colt said, "I have something for you." He disappeared into the bedroom and returned with a small wooden box, hand-carved with intricate patterns. "I made this while you were sewing your dress," he said, handing it to her. "Open it." Inside, nestled in soft cloth, was a single peach pit. "I saved it," Colt explained, "from the bear bait. I know it seems strange, but that hunt, that's where everything changed. Where I stopped seeing you as just another person and started seeing you as everything." Mara picked up the pit, feeling its rough surface, its weight. "We should plant it." "Now?" "Why not? Start our life together by planting something that will outlive us both." So they did. In the darkness, by lantern light, they dug a hole near the house and planted that single peach pit. It would take years to grow, years to bear fruit, but it was a promise, a beginning. When they finished, Mara's hands were covered in dirt. Her wedding dress was hanging in the wardrobe, her family was scattered to the winds, and her whole life had been upended in the span of a few weeks. And she had never been happier. Over the following months, Mara and Colt settled into the rhythm of their new life. They woke before dawn to tend the animals, worked the land until their backs ached, fell into bed exhausted but satisfied. It was hard work, harder than Mara had imagined, but it was theirs. They hired 2 ranch hands, young men who'd been struggling to find work and who treated Mara with respect from the first day. She taught them about orchard management, about reading the tree's needs, about patience and timing. They taught her about horse training, about reading weather patterns, about the practical skills her father had never bothered to share. The first real test came in January when a winter storm hit harder than anyone expected. Snow piled 6 feet high. The temperature dropped so low that water froze in the pipes. They worked around the clock to keep the animals alive, to prevent the trees from being damaged by ice, to maintain the fires that kept them from freezing. Mara thought they might break under the pressure, thought the stress might reveal cracks in their partnership. Instead, it showed them how well they worked together. Colt's calm steadiness balanced Mara's tendency to worry. Her careful planning complemented his ability to improvise. When one of them was ready to give up, the other found strength to keep going. They survived the storm, and they came out stronger. In March, the first sign of spring appeared, tiny green shoots pushing up through the snow. Mara checked them daily, her heart full of cautious hope. Her mother's trees, the ones she'd thought might not survive her father's neglect, were coming back to life. And near the house, a single tiny sprout emerged from where they'd planted the peach pit. Mara knelt beside it, tears streaming down her face, while Colt stood behind her with his hand on her shoulder. "It grew," she whispered. "Of course it did. You planted it." By summer, the orchard was thriving. The harvest that year was the best Red Hollow had seen in a decade. Mara and Colt hired additional help during the busy season, paying fair wages and treating everyone with dignity. Word spread, and soon they had more workers than they needed, people drawn to a place where labor was valued and respected. The town's attitude toward them shifted gradually. The mockery faded, replaced first by grudging respect and then by genuine admiration. People saw what Mara and Colt were building, not just a successful business, but a model for how things could be done differently. How workers could be partners instead of servants. How the forgotten and overlooked could become the foundation of something strong. Mayor Hutchins approached them in September with another proposal. This time, instead of trying to take a cut of their profits, he asked if they'd be willing to teach their methods to other farmers, to help lift up the whole community instead of just themselves. Mara looked at Colt. He nodded. "We'd be happy to," Mara said, "on one condition." "Name it. You establish a fund to help young people, especially young women who want to start their own businesses but don't have family support, education, small loans, mentorship, real opportunities, not charity." Hutchins looked surprised. "That's a significant undertaking." "Yes, it is. But if you want our help, that's the price." Mara's voice was firm. "I don't want any other girl to grow up believing she's worthless because her family told her so. If we're going to build something better, it has to include everyone." The mayor agreed. And over the following years, the program helped dozens of young people launch businesses, pursue education, escape situations that would have broken them. Each one carried a small piece of Mara's story forward. 5 years after their wedding, Mara stood in the orchard on a warm September evening, watching Colt teach their daughter how to identify when a peach was ready for harvest. She was 4 years old, dark-haired and serious, with her father's gray eyes and her mother's determination. Her name was Margaret, after the grandmother she'd never met, and she loved the orchard with a fierceness that made Mara's heart ache. "Gently," Colt was saying, guiding small hands to cup the fruit. "You don't want to bruise it. Feel how it gives just slightly when you press? That means it's perfect." Margaret picked the peach carefully and held it up triumphantly. "I did it!" "You did," Colt agreed, his scarred face soft with pride. "Just like your mother taught me." Mara approached, and Margaret ran to her, presenting the peach like a trophy. "Look, Mama, a perfect one." "So it is." Mara took the fruit, examining it with exaggerated seriousness. "This might be the best peach I've ever seen. What should we do with it?" "Eat it," Margaret declared. So they did, the 3 of them sitting beneath the oldest tree in the orchard, the one Mara's mother had planted first, the one that had survived drought and neglect and her father's cruelty. They shared the peach, its juice sweet and sun-warm, while the evening light turned everything golden. "Tell me about Grandmother Margaret," their daughter said. It was her favorite story, so Mara told it again. About a woman who had planted an orchard against all odds, who had protected her daughter's future the only way she knew how, who had believed in creating something lasting even when the world seemed determined to tear everything down. And she told her about the lessons she'd learned, about how courage wasn't the absence of fear but the choice to act despite it, about how strength came in many forms, in patience and persistence, in knowing when to stand firm and when to let go, about how love wasn't about grand gestures but about showing up every day and choosing someone over and over again. Margaret listened with the intense focus only children possess, absorbing every word. When the story finished, she said, "When I grow up, I'm going to have an orchard too, even bigger than this one." "I believe you will," Mara said, brushing dirt from her daughter's cheek. "And I'll help you plant it." As the sun set over the mountains, turning the sky purple and gold, Mara thought about the girl she used to be. The one who'd believed she was too big, too awkward, too much of everything except what people wanted. The one who'd made herself small and invisible and grateful for whatever scraps were thrown her way. That girl would never have believed this life was possible, that she could be happy, that she could be loved, that she could build something beautiful and lasting out of the ashes of what had been taken from her. But that girl had also been stronger than she knew. She'd survived. She'd endured. She'd kept her mother's orchard alive through sheer force of will when everyone else had given up on it. And when the moment came to choose her own path, she'd found the courage to take it. Colt's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close. Margaret ran ahead through the rows of trees, her laughter echoing in the twilight. "What are you thinking about?" Colt asked. "About how far we've come. About everything that had to break before we could build something new." Mara leaned into him. "About how grateful I am that you saw me in the dark and didn't look away. I could say the same about you." They stood there together, watching their daughter play among the trees Mara's mother had planted, in the orchard that had been stolen and reclaimed, in the life they'd built through courage and stubbornness and love. The bear was long dead. The father who'd tried to break her was gone. The sisters who'd mocked her had found their own paths. The town that had laughed had learned to respect. And Mara Mercer, once Mara Bellamy, the unwanted daughter, the forgotten girl, stood in the heart of everything she'd protected and everything she'd built, and knew with absolute certainty that she was finally, truly home. Not because of the land beneath her feet, though that mattered. Not because of the orchard around her, though she loved every tree. But because she'd chosen to see herself as worthy. Because she'd chosen courage over comfort. Because she'd chosen a partner who saw her strength and called it beautiful. And because she'd learned the most important lesson of all, that being wanted wasn't about changing yourself to fit someone else's vision. It was about being brave enough to be yourself and trusting that the right people would recognize your worth. Beneath the oldest peach tree her mother had planted, in the twilight of a perfect autumn evening, Mara Mercer smiled. She had been the unwanted daughter, but she had never been unwanted at all. She had been waiting for the moment when she could want herself enough to build the life she deserved. And now, surrounded by love and laughter and the promise of fruit yet to ripen, she had everything she'd never known to dream of. She was home. She was chosen. She was free. And that finally was enough.